Could a single, honest confession from Chris Martin, an icon of global music long regarded as safe, polished, and diplomatic, be powerful enough to shake the American music industry and quietly alter the future of TAEKOOK and BTS? Or are we witnessing the opening chapter of a historical shift no one has dared to discuss openly? No one was truly prepared for how this story resurfaced. Nearly 3 years have passed since that small, seemingly trivial, yet deeply meaningful moment unfolded on stage. Kim Taehyung and Jungkook of BTS playfully splashing water at each other, laughing freely, unscripted, unchoreographed, without any visible promotional agenda. Just two young men at the peak of global fame, momentarily forgetting that millions of eyes were watching them. That short clip, once dismissed as a sweet piece of fan service, has now returned to the spotlight after being reshared by one of the most influential international fan accounts. And from that moment on, questions began to echo, not only among ARMY, but also behind the closed doors of the Western music industry. Why did such a simple clip suddenly become a serious topic of discussion? Why did executives, producers, and even veteran musicians in the United States begin talking again about two names that never truly left their radar? And most unsettling of all, what does all of this have to do with Chris Martin's confession, now whispered to be too honest? For an industry as calculated as America's, Chris Martin is no ordinary figure. As the frontman of Coldplay, he has survived and adapted through every major era of the music industry, from physical CDs to the digital revolution, from downloads to algorithm-driven streaming dominance. He is also known for embracing cross-cultural collaboration, including his warm and genuine relationship with BTS. Precisely because of his reputation as a diplomatic and thoughtful artist, every word he utters carries unusual weight. When an old interview resurfaced and one fragment of his statement was reinterpreted by the public, the atmosphere shifted. I end that interview. Chris Martin spoke about emotional honesty on stage and how global audiences are becoming increasingly sensitive to genuine relationships between artists rather than narratives constructed by labels. At the time, the comment passed without major upheaval. Today, however, as the Taehyung Jungkook waterplay clip goes viral once again, those words feel like a missing puzzle piece. Was Chris Martin hinting at something bigger? Was he indirectly acknowledging that the energy between these two BTS members possesses a power that transcends conventional marketing strategies? The American music industry, which for decades has thrived on tightly controlled narratives, suddenly finds itself in an uneasy position. On one hand, it admires BTS as an undeniable global force. On the other, it recognizes that the group's internal dynamics, especially emotional bonds that feel undeniably real, are something that cannot be easily replicated or manufactured. TAEKOOK, as the embodiment of that closeness, becomes a complex focal point, beloved by fans, endlessly discussed by media, yet closely monitored by the industry itself. Watching the waterplay clip again today feels different. It is no longer just about laughter or spontaneity, but about body language, eye contact, and a level of comfort that feels almost too natural for a massive stage. Cultural scholars have begun referencing the concept of performative intimacy, a term describing moments when artists are not acting but genuinely present as themselves before the public. In this context, Taehyung and Jungkook were not selling anything. They were simply being. And that, ironically, is what makes it disruptive to traditional systems. The question then expands. If global audiences increasingly value this kind of authenticity, does the American music industry's long-standing model of image control still hold power? Chris Martin, with his decades of experience, seems to understand both the risks and the opportunities of this shift. His acknowledgement that the future of global music will be shaped by real human connections rather than chart manipulation sounds like a subtle warning to his Western peers. TAEKOOK, in this narrative, is no longer just a fan-favorite pairing. They become a living case study of how human connection can outshine even the most sophisticated business strategies. It is no surprise that industry analysts are beginning to ask, has BTS, and specifically the Taehyung Jungkook dynamic, forced the American industry to look in the mirror? Has their dominance always been about more than musical quality, about the courage to show emotion without filters? Naturally, not everyone is comfortable with this possibility. Attention can be felt, even if rarely spoken aloud. Mainstream American media tends to tread carefully when discussing BTS's internal relationships. Every word is chosen cautiously, every interpretation wrapped in neutrality. Yet behind the scenes, conversations are reportedly intense. One veteran producer is rumored to have said that energy like that cannot be controlled, and that's exactly why it's both terrifying and invaluable. When the fan account reshared the clip, the reaction was not mere nostalgia. Comment sections filled with new questions, theories, and deeply emotional reflections. Many fans admitted they cried, not out of sadness, but because they were reminded why they fell in love with BTS in the first place. Not for records or awards, but for the humanity revealed in small, unguarded moments like this. Here lies the biggest surprise. Just hours after the clip went viral again, Chris Martin's old quote began trending. Not because he explicitly mentioned TAEKOOK, but because people started connecting long-separated dots. It felt like an unspoken admission that BTS, and especially the relationship between Taehyung and Jungkook, has taught the Western music industry a costly lesson. Emotional honesty cannot be faked, and global audiences can feel it across continents. Does this mean the future of TAEKOK within BTS will change dramatically? There is no definitive answer. What is clear, however, is that they now stand at a crucial crossroads. Every gesture, every interaction will be interpreted more deeply than ever before. The weight is heavy, yet it also opens new possibilities. If the American industry truly shifts toward valuing authenticity, then Taehyung and Jungkook may not need to change anything at all. They simply need to remain themselves. Ironically, the hardest thing to do on a global stage, this story is far from over. In fact, it may only be beginning. Chris Martin's confession, the revived clip, and the emotional response from fans are merely the surface of a larger current moving beneath the global music industry. Is the United States ready to embrace this change? Will BTS, with all its internal dynamics, become the catalyst that accelerates it? And most intriguingly of all, when we rewatch that water play moment on stage, are we looking at a sweet memory from the past, or a glimpse of the future of global music that we have yet to fully understand? And as the conversation continues to ripple outward, the implications grow heavier, more complex, and far more unsettling than many initially expected. Because once authenticity becomes the central currency of global music, everything else, branding, image control, even carefully scripted narratives, begins to feel fragile. This is where the story of TAEKOK quietly transforms from a fan-driven discussion into a broader cultural question that the American music industry can no longer ignore. Behind closed doors, insiders have begun to acknowledge something they rarely say publicly. BTS disrupted not just charts, but the emotional contract between artist and audience. And within that disruption, the dynamic between Taehyung and Jungkook occupies a unique space. It is neither explicitly defined nor easily categorized, which makes it resistant to the usual mechanisms of control. In an industry built on labels, both literal and metaphorical, ambiguity becomes power. And power, when it cannot be neatly packaged, becomes a threat. This is where Chris Martin's words take on an even sharper edge. When he spoke about honesty on stage, he wasn't merely referencing performance technique. He was touching on a deeper shift in audience psychology. Modern listeners are no longer passive consumers. They analyze micro-expressions, revisit old footage, compare timelines, and sense emotional shifts with an almost forensic intensity. The resurfacing of the Taehyung, Jungkook clip proves this. A moment once brushed aside as playful suddenly reads differently in a world hungry for sincerity. What startled many industry observers was not the clip itself, but the speed and scale of the reaction. Within hours, discussions crossed linguistic and cultural boundaries. Western fans, Eastern fans, casual listeners, and cultural commentators all converged on the same question: why does this feel more real than so much of what we are shown today? That question alone poses a serious challenge to an industry that has long relied on spectacle over substance. Emotion, once considered a liability that needed to be carefully managed, is now emerging as the most valuable asset. TAEKOOK embodies this shift almost accidentally. There is no grand declaration, no dramatic reveal, just continuity. Consistency over time. Familiar gestures repeated across years. That is precisely what gives the narrative its weight. Authenticity is not proven in one moment, but across many, and this is something algorithms cannot manufacture. American labels have taken note. While no official statements exist, the silence itself speaks volumes. In the past, viral moments involving non-Western artists were often dismissed as temporary phenomena. This time feels different. The continued relevance of BTS, even during periods of reduced group activity, suggests endurance rather than novelty. And within that endurance, relational dynamics like Taehyung and Jungkook's are being studied, whether openly admitted or not. There is also a growing academic interest surrounding this phenomenon. Cultural theorists are beginning to argue that BTS represents a post-industrial model of pop stardom, one where emotional transparency replaces mystique and where connection outweighs distance. In this framework, TAEKOOK is not an anomaly, but an inevitability. When artists grow together publicly over years, bonds form that cannot be edited out without consequence. This raises uncomfortable questions for the future. If audiences demand realness, how far can artists go before the industry intervenes? Where is the line between personal truth and professional expectation? Taehyung and Jungkook, whether they intend to or not, are standing at that boundary. Every shared glance, every spontaneous laugh, every unscripted interaction becomes loaded with meaning in an environment primed to decode it. The emotional toll of this scrutiny should not be underestimated. Being genuine in a global spotlight is not liberating, it is exhausting. Yet paradoxically, stepping back now would feel more artificial than continuing as they are. This is the quiet dilemma at the heart of TAEKOOK's future within BTS. Authenticity, once revealed, cannot be unseen. And attempts to suppress it often backfire, creating even more suspicion and longing among audiences. Chris Martin's role in this narrative remains fascinating precisely because of his position as an insider-outsider. He belongs to the Western establishment, yet has openly admired BTS's approach. His subtle acknowledgement feels less like praise and more like recognition, an admission that the rules have changed, whether the industry is ready or not. For younger artists watching from the sidelines, this moment may serve as validation that honesty is not career suicide, but perhaps the next evolution of longevity. As this story continues to unfold, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. The future of global music may not be shaped by louder productions or more aggressive marketing, but by quieter moments that feel undeniably human. A splash of water on a stage. Shared laughter. Comfort that does not need explanation. These are the fragments that linger long after trends fade. When people ask whether this moment will change the future of TAEKOOK, the more accurate question might be whether the future can move forward without acknowledging what they represent. Because in a world saturated with content, what truly shocks is not spectacle, but sincerity. And that, more than any confession or viral clip, may be the most disruptive force of all. And yet, even as sincerity rises to the surface as the most disruptive force in modern music, the story grows more layered, more tense, and more emotionally charged than a simple narrative of authenticity versus industry control. Because once sincerity is recognized, it creates expectations, and expectations, in the global spotlight, can be just as suffocating as artificial images. This is the paradox quietly surrounding Taehyung and Jungkook now, a paradox the American music industry is only beginning to comprehend. There is an unspoken awareness that moments like the one on stage with water cannot be recreated on demand. They exist precisely because they are accidental, unplanned, and fleeting. Yet once the world labels them as meaningful, the pressure to live up to that meaning intensifies. For TAEKOOK, this means every future interaction is no longer neutral. It is measured against a memory that fans hold sacred, analyzed through countless replays, slowed frames, and emotional interpretations that stretch far beyond the original moment itself. This is where the narrative becomes emotionally dangerous. Not because of scandal or controversy, but because of expectation. The industry understands how to manage outrage and hype. What it struggles with is devotion, especially devotion rooted in perceived truth. Devotion does not fade easily. It lingers, it waits, and it watches. And the American music industry, built on cycles of reinvention, is uneasy with something that refuses to move on. Insiders have reportedly begun discussing BTS in a different tone altogether. No longer as a global phenomenon from Korea, but as a structural anomaly. Their longevity challenges assumptions about language barriers, cultural export limits, and even the lifespan of idol groups. Within those conversations, Taehyung and Jungkook's bond is often cited as an example of why BTS feels less like a product and more like a living organism, one that evolves organically rather than according to quarterly projections. Chris Martin's earlier acknowledgement now feels prophetic in this context. His words echo not as commentary, but as confirmation of a shift already underway. When he spoke of honesty resonating more deeply than perfection, he may have been articulating what many Western artists sense but hesitate to embrace. Perfection is safe. Honesty is volatile. And volatility, while risky, is what drives cultural change. The resurfaced clip acts as a catalyst because it exposes this contrast so clearly. There is nothing perfect about it. Water splashes awkwardly. Movements overlap. Laughter interrupts rhythm. Yet that imperfection is exactly what anchors it in memory. It does not feel archived. It feels alive. And for an industry increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and hyper-curated visuals, something alive is both fascinating and unsettling. Fans intuitively recognize this tension. That is why reactions to the clip are not casual. They are emotional, reflective, sometimes even defensive. Many express fear that something so pure could be diluted, misunderstood, or exploited. Others worry about the weight placed on Taehyung and Jungkook themselves, who never asked to become symbols of a cultural reckoning. This duality, adoration mixed with anxiety, adds another layer of emotional complexity to the conversation. What makes this moment particularly significant is its timing. Global music is at a crossroads. Audiences are fatigued by excess, skeptical of spectacle, and increasingly drawn to narratives that feel grounded. In this environment, BTS, and by extension TAEKOOK, does not feel like a trend, but like a response. A response to years of distance between artist and audience, to personas that feel untouchable and therefore unrelatable. The American music industry, for all its influence, is not immune to this shift. Younger executives and creatives are reportedly questioning long-held assumptions about image management. Some see in BTS a blueprint for sustainability rather than domination, a model where connection fuels longevity. Others remain cautious, aware that authenticity cannot be scaled or standardized without losing its essence.